Welcome to Concrete Conversations, the Indian real estate podcast. I'm Yash.
And I'm Akshay.
And we're the hosts of the show.
Student housing has historically been an unorganized sector in India, with individual-run small-scale providers dominating the market.
However, as students return to college campuses in 2022, the demand for Purpose Built Student Accommodation is seeing a resurgence. To talk to us about the rebounding growth of student housing in India and the potential that this sector holds, we have with us today Shubha and Nidhi Kumra of Your Space.
Both Shubha and Nidhi have had close to a decade of experience in the corporate world, having worked in consulting and investment banking respectively, at leading firms such as McKinsey and Company and Bank of America Merrill Lynch.
They went on to found Your Space in 2016, which has become one of the largest organized players in this market, with over 7,000 operational beds across 9 cities as of earlier this year. Recently, Your Space has raised $10 million as they expand their presence into new markets across India.
So, without further ado, let's educate ourselves about the rise of student housing in India.
Hi Shubha and Nidhi, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us at Concrete Conversations. I know it's a Wednesday, but I hope your week has been going well.
Not too bad. Can't complain.
Okay, that's good to hear. So to start things off, we usually ask our guests a little bit about their career and how they got to where they are today and the companies they're working in today. And I know that the both of you have a wealth of very diverse experience in different industries. So I thought with that in mind, we could start off by just talking about what your career path was in getting to Your Space, which is what we're going to speak about today.
Sure, I can take that. So actually, like you said, Nidhi and I we had both had about 10 plus years of corporate experience before we embarked on our entrepreneurial journey. I remember commenting that we were probably one of the older founders when we started this 6 years ago because the others were all sort of fresh out of college.
Right.
Both of us have sort of respectively consulting and banking careers. I studied at Lady Shri Ram College in Delhi, did my economics, then did my MBA from IIM Calcutta, and then started my career as a consultant. I spent 4 years at McKinsey and then time with Nomura in London, which is actually where I met Nidhi. And Nidhi very similarly also did maths at St. Stephen's, then went into Trinity College with the Bill and Melinda Gates Scholarship to study maths further, and then joined investment banking and has been a trader for 10 years. So very long corporate careers, but I think that was one of the reasons that pushed us to start something of our own. I think we were quite keen to see a change in pace. We were quite keen to run something of our own, build a business, a brand from ground up. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what is it that we wanted to run. And Nidhi and I keep joking about it. We thought through various types of business ideas, but student housing is one that stuck with us both on a personal and a professional note. And that's how sort of Your Space started.
And I think just to that, having worked in corporate, large corporates also gave us an idea and a good sense of how companies are run.
Right.
At least there was some benchmarking to what we aspire to build. So I think we're quite, glad that we've had that 10 years of rigorous grind, because that kind of made us the people that we are, the professionalism, and an aspiration to have.
Right.
Perfect. And just building upon that, like you said, given the experience that you had, you identified student housing as the entrepreneurial venture that you would pursue. But any other thoughts or kind of inspiration behind this choice? Was it more of, the fact that the market itself is growing, or that it's more of a sunrise sector, or were there other thoughts at play here as well?
So I think a couple of things, right? Back in 2014-15, whilst we were in London, we were observing the space quite actively. Student housing is a very well-defined vertical in the West, right?
Right.
In Europe, in the US, in Australia. So you hear a lot about it. You've heard a lot about, private equity transactions. And I myself had lived at Cambridge, so I'd seen what student housing is like. So I think that was just a general awareness on the space. But there was were some personal experiences also that happened. At the same time, when Shubha and I were sort of brainstorming what our next venture should be, my cousin was going to Christ in Bangalore. And at that time, I remember my uncle, complaining about, bad quality accommodation, the food not being up to the mark. And I was just narrating that to Shubha at some point. And at that time, it sort of struck a chord with both of us, right? It was something that we realized is not a luxury item. It's not about changing a client behavior. Students will always go to study. Hostels is something that will always be needed. How about organizing this space? And then to just scratch the surface a little bit more, in the winter of 2015, when Shubha and I had both come down to India, we decided to do a walk around North Campus and South Campus just to see what the supply looked like 12 years after we had graduated. And the one thing we took away is nothing had changed, right? It was still a very mom and pop sort of run setup.
Right.
And that's sort of what kind of pushed us to say, listen, why don't we try and organize this space? Why does student living have to be so difficult? Why isn't it easy for a parent to think of an organized place, just like a hotel, right? If you want to travel to a city, you go online and look for a hotel, a certain brand in mind. Why can't there be a brand of hostels that a parent can just rely on and just go and book online?
Right.
I think that's how this conversation started, and from that point on, it was we just were quite excited about what the opportunity we saw.
Right.
And I think Nidhi and I have both lived in hostels ourselves, right? So I think we could identify with what is it that a student is looking for when they leave home for the first time. We've had parents who brought us to an unknown city. We understand that they went through. I think because we had a personal connect, we could identify as individuals of having gone through the same process, made it a much easier decision when the numbers stacked up.
Right.
Perfect. Okay. So moving on, since we were kind of discussing the problem statement, and as you said, the both of you went and took a walk around North Campus and South Campus in Delhi, and that it's a more individual-run industry here. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the differences between the more traditional offerings that we've seen for student housing in India, whether that's PG or rentals, versus actual organized student housing, which is what your space is working on.
So I think, as a starting point, it's just probably to start with is the size of the asset itself and the quality of the asset itself.
Right.
So typically for us, we will have a minimum number of beds at a property versus the local operations could vary anywhere between somebody renting out a couple of rooms in their house to a floor, right? So for us, that's probably the first difference, a standalone structure. So, it's again not a flat that is available, in a building, but we would take an entire building to be able to create a full-fledged community. So I think size of the building, quality of the asset, the look and feel of the product, and the services that we provide. So the product, I feel, is an upgrade, and then the standardization of the product across the board. So anyone who goes to a Your Space in North Campus and a South Campus, or in a Bangalore or a Bombay, will have a similar look and feel and structural look and feel to the product, right? So that's, I think, one thing. I think secondly, the community piece of it, right? So for us, housing is not just about the student, lodging and the food and the housekeeping, but it's a whole student lifestyle and a student ecosystem that we want to build.
Right.
And I think that's the key difference, right? So one, we'll have large common spaces where we will run a lot of community events, celebrate festivals, make sure that we make it home away from home. So there's always something to do at the property for the students as well.
Right.
So I think that will be the key difference. Security is a critical element for us, because it's also the parents who are sending the kids. So from a security perspective, CCTV cameras, 24/7 security guards, a full-time warden. I think all these things sort of stand out from just a traditional mom and pop sort of run setup.
Absolutely. So let's just take a step back and say, I'm a student. I'm moving to a city like Pune or Mumbai for college. Could you give me like a quick 1-minute snapshot of how I would go about finding the right accommodation at a Your Space location, and what I would be getting in terms of standardized service, or in terms of the property, what I could expect?
Sure, I can do that. So if you are looking for an accommodation in Pune, typically you would be going online and looking for PGs, hostels, serviced accommodation around the college area, because typically students like to be within walking distance of the college. So you would open your Google search and say hostels, PGs near Symbiosis, Viman Nagar, right? And then options would pop up on the screen on sort of local providers or us plus anybody else who in that area. If you click on the Your Space website, it will take you to the 2-3 properties that we would have around that college. And then on the website, you'll get pictures, you'll get a video walkthrough, you'll get the amenities, pricing, types of rooms that are available. All of those details are on the website. You can also book a video call or a chat with the salesperson or the person on the ground who would then call you back, take you through a video call of the entire place, show you the facilities, amenities in real time, and sort of explain the Your Space offering. But to answer the second part of your question in terms of what is a typical Your Space offering, it would either be a single, twin, or triple sharing room with an ensuite bathroom, fully furnished with bed, cupboard,
Right.
side table, study table, chair. That's in terms of the room furniture. You can pick or choose whether you want an air conditioned room or a non air conditioned room. In terms of facilities, as a 24-hour security at the building, as a 24-hour property manager who stays at the building, housekeeping is daily by a professional agency. Food is provided for, which is cooked in our own kitchens, so that we can have different meal plans. It can be a 3-time meal plan or a 4-time meal plan. Then there will be other facilities that are provided. There is unlimited Wi-Fi. There is laundry service, both in terms of machines at the property plus ironing facilities. There'll be a nice common area for you to sit and relax. There could be if it's a bigger property, there'll be a gym there as well, and sort of other games areas. So that's sort of the full, depending on kind of what type of room you want, you can sort of select that, and then sort of the other services are part of the overall package.
Right, right. I think one of the things you talked about is obviously, if I was a student, I would Google, properties close to my college in and around the area. I think that opens us up to a very interesting point, which is the property selection process. So we just wanted to get a sense of, what it is that Your Space looks for when, in terms of the prerequisites of the structure, in terms of the location planning and the mode of acquisition that you'll go about for actually finalizing which properties can be turned around into Your Space accommodations.
So typically, I think the first criteria Shubha mentioned is distance to college, right? We appreciate that the kids need to be within a certain 1 or 2 kilometers around college. Given some cities may not have a very strong infrastructure. Other cities kids use bikes, and also you're limited by that. So I think the first criteria for us is always typically a certain kilometer radius in that local micro market. So for example, in a Delhi university, typically all our hostels are within 2 kilometers of all the colleges. In a Bombay, that could go up to 4 to 5 kilometers, right? Just given the nature of real estate. I think that's something we pen down on first, is the distance from college. Second thing is obviously the size of the asset. So for us, a minimum number of beds is important for us to be able to offer a certain kind of services, right? Because for us, it's economies of scale. So there's a minimum bed number that we require, and that again depends on the selling price in that market, right? So in a market where we're selling the beds at 10,000 rupees, you need more beds. In a market where you're selling at 20,000, you need less beds, right? But there is a minimum revenue threshold that we decide to be able to take up an asset.
Right.
Thirdly, we typically look at standalone structures, like I said. So we want to control the entire experience start to finish. So the entry, exit, security. And then obviously have the common spaces to make sure we can run community events. So for us, that common area becomes very valuable, right? Because that's the only place to bring everyone together.
Right.
We also make sure every room has an attached washroom, so that's something which is very important for us. To make sure whether it's 2 or 3, but maximum 2 or 3 sharing a bathroom. So that's again something that we look at. Well ventilated rooms becomes a very big criteria. So typically, a lot of properties we see, and we actually dismiss those completely because they don't have natural ventilation. And we appreciate if you're living 365 days, it's not a hotel, right? You can't live with no natural air, no natural light. It's a qualitative aspect, but it becomes quite important when we finalize assets.
Yeah, and also one can imagine that students who are commuting to college and busy sort of working on projects don't have a lot of time to figure out cleaning their rooms and airing out their rooms. So it's good to have natural light and ventilation.
No, no, absolutely, absolutely, right. I mean, in a hotel, we don't realize, the windows don't open. But imagine 365 days a year if you were living in that. That's a, you need natural light. It's
Yeah.
and ventilation. So I think those are things we've also learned over time. What matters, what doesn't matter. Kids tend to spend a lot of time in their rooms eventually, right? When they come back from college, they'll spend time, with studying, etc. So you need to make sure the rooms are very comfortable.
Right.
So that's something, again, we've built up. Our prioritization has sort of evolved over the last couple of years. Seeing student behavior on ground.
Right. Perfect. And just going ahead from there, once you've identified the right property, whether that's in terms of qualitative aspects or just the location, once everything meets your parameters, what kind of work goes into these properties before they're ready to be occupied by students?
So when once BD signs a property and that is approved by the management, the property gets handed over to the transformation team. The transformation team has a very detailed checklist covering all aspects of the building, from furniture to fire extinguishers to CCTV to Wi-Fi. There's a very detailed checklist that they have to follow that needs to be completed before occupation of the building happens. And typically what we do is we will do the entire sort of soft furnishings falls within the scope of your space, which allows us to standardize the furniture for the room and the common areas. Our design booklet is set already, so the transformation team works with the internal design team to sort of apply that design book to that particular property. Furniture is ordered accordingly, and all the other upgrade work gets started. We have a list of central vendors for almost all our services. Materials are ordered, and typically takes about 30 to 45 days for us to turn around a property
Right.
into a your space property.
Right. That makes sense. And obviously, since we're talking about the transformation of this property, standardization is probably a huge criteria on that checklist that you have. We thought it might be interesting to ask you, about your experience with standardizing the properties across various spaces, which each property you find may have its own unique challenges, but then also then across the micro markets that you are operating in. Each of those micro markets may have unique challenges. So, are there any learnings that have come out of this process of standardization that might be interesting for our listeners?
I think there are a couple of things that we have learned during our journey, right? One, there's a minimum room size below which we would not go.
Okay.
In terms of a twin sharing room, what's the sort of the minimum size? Second is ensuite bathrooms, again something that we don't compromise on. Availability of a common space, right? Whether it's for meal service or for the common areas. So we've identified 2-3 non-negotiables which must be there in every building, but of course the look and feel of it might be different in each city and asset, but some of those core things have to be there. And then sort of our internal design team works with the design booklet to make sure that it's upgraded, and also the furniture then is consistent across cities, which helps even further in sort of the look and feel and the standardization across properties.
Right. And just as a follow-up here, one of the things that may, from a real estate standpoint, obviously prove to be a challenge is the longevity of these properties, right? Like maintenance of the facilities and the upkeep of the properties. So is there anything unique that your space takes on over there which enables you all to make sure that the churn of the rooms year on year is up to mark and up to standard?
I think age of the property is the biggest driver in terms of maintenance, right? I think the newer the properties, the lesser the churn and lower the sort of maintenance cost. So I think given we are a very active BD team, if we are confident of the market, we are willing to sign buildings much before when they are still under the construction phase, which allows us to then dictate some of the design features that we would require, some of the equipment that needs to go in. So I think signing buildings earlier and signing newer buildings certainly helps with that aspect.
Right, right. And y'all both mentioned that y'all have stayed abroad and y'all have experienced student housing abroad. So, what kind of adaptations to the model were required to bring this into an Indian context?
So I think the major difference between student housing in the West and here is largely the services component, right? So what student housing for us, for me in Cambridge, was a lovely studio apartment, well furnished, standardized look and feel, and housekeeping once a week, right? That was broadly what accommodation for us was, right? I think here we feel that there is a lot more services, and you would do your laundry yourself. There would be a laundry room. You would go do your laundry yourself. There would be a mess. You would go, you know, go eat there. Otherwise, if you wanted to clean your room, otherwise through the week you clean it yourself.
Right.
So very basic in terms of services, right? I feel in India it is a very service heavy sort of a product. So right from the security element of it to a 24/7 warden. So for example, we never had wardens in the West, right? But here you have a warden who's somebody who's sort of your local guardian. You'll have somebody doing housekeeping for you every day, meals taken care of, customized meals, somebody else doing laundry for you, payment of electricity bills taken care of. So I feel like a lot more services oriented than a real estate play, if that makes sense.
Food, I think, is another big example, right? Typically, most of the hospitals outside, you have to sort of either cook for yourself or tie up with a service. So, food is a big example. 24-hour caretaker warden is another big example. A lot of hostels outside are just manned by biometric gates, etc. There may be one sort of supervisor. There isn't like a dedicated person at every site. Those are some of the two biggest differentiators.
Right, right.
Right. Perfect. And since we're kind of through most of the points we had about the business model per se, I just wanted to ask you, when you guys rent it out, I'm guessing y'all are renting out to students for a period of about a year, right?
Correct.
So when y'all look at leases for spaces, do y'all try for longer leases given the kind of investment and capital expenditure that goes into each your space place?
Absolutely. So for us, the idea is once you take it on, you've invested in the standardization and the upgrade of the property. The idea is to spend as much time as possible there. So our leases are actually much longer, anywhere between 9 to 12 years long.
Right.
And our leases with students are typically 1 year.
Got it. Yeah, one of the things that could also be a huge adaptation for this model in an Indian context is the fact that there is a lot of parental involvement, especially in Eastern markets, when it comes to students, right? So we were wondering, what is the involvement of parents when it comes to the selection of a student housing option, and what is the value add that a firm like your space offers for these parents? We've touched upon things like security, of course, which is a huge plus, and locational advantages, but there must be a lot of education also involved with actually you guys explaining to the parents that this is a model that's different from your typical PG or your typical student hostel that they've seen in India before, right?
I think absolutely that parents are a big part of the purchase decision, and especially if in the first year, right, when a student has just graduated from school and it's the first year of college, they're in a brand new city. The parents are even more involved in that decision, to the extent that they will actually come with the student, look at the various options. They look at a your space hostel. We encourage them to see stuff around as well, so they can actually understand what is the difference in the service that we are offering versus others in the market. They look at security is obviously one, but they'll taste the food, they'll meet the 24-hour property manager, they'll see the location of the building. Some parents even go into selecting the room. I would like a room that faces east, or parents have a very long criteria, but I think it's important to get them involved in that process. It also helps us because ultimately it's the parent who pays for the service,
Right.
and we're quite cognizant that we have two customers in that sense. It's the parent who pays and the student who experiences the product, so the product needs to match and balance both their requirements.
Right.
Over the period. So the parents stay quite involved. They kind of understand why there is a difference versus your local mom and pop operator. They understand this is a private company. It's a professionally organized. There is a sort of hierarchy. There's people accountable for day-to-day jobs that have to be done. There is a customer grievance cell. There is a there's a sales and marketing team. There's a separate community. So they understand that this is a much more organized setup. And I think they stay from on an ongoing day-to-day basis. They stay in touch with the property manager. Because anyway, they have to inform whether the student is not going to be there overnight. If they're going on leave for a few days, or the student is not well, we would like to be in touch with the parents. So there is regular communication and with the parents that happen on these aspects.
Perfect. So I think now that we've kind of discussed in depth the problem statement and also the value proposition of the product, of your space as a product, I thought that we could take a step back and have a look at the market for student housing in general. So I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think of the prospects of student housing as a market overall? Is it a growing market currently, and how large of a market or how much untapped potential possibly is there in student housing in India?
As per the last published MHRDA data, which was in 2019, before COVID,
Right.
there are about 35 million students in the country who are pursuing higher education, so 13 plus, and this number is growing at an annual rate of about 4%, right? So that's the pool of students we're talking pursuing, undergrad and post graduation. Almost 50% of these students typically travel to another city other than their home city to pursue higher education. And this number is actually increasing over time as migration is becoming, easier, finding an accommodation is becoming easier, etc. Right? But on an average, about 50% is outstation students. So that's almost 17 million students we're talking about who are looking for accommodation at any given point in time. And the on-campus accommodation, which is the accommodation that a college provides, is typically just 20% of this requirement, right? So the remaining 80% of 17 million students are typically looking for accommodation and are staying somewhere today, right? Whether it's an organized player like ourselves or a mom and pop sort of run setup, or even renting an apartment themselves. And just to put context to this is, globally today, the organized players are roughly 25 to 30% of the market share. And in India today, that number, if you put all the organized players together and assume all the supply the organized players have are around education hubs, is not even 1%. So to just answer your point, I think the market is huge. It is under-penetrated from an organized player perspective. I think there's a long way to go. Will this ever become 100% organized? Probably not. But even the journey from 1% to 25% is a good enough market to capture.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know we discussed this when we spoke last, and it is definitely something that affects demand in a big way. And that is the price sensitivity of the student housing market. What I thought would be interesting to understand is we've talked about standardization of the experience across different markets and different properties. But have you found through your experience that there is a price sensitivity in certain markets more than in other markets when it comes to student housing? And how have you addressed that issue?
See, I think the price sensitivity is dependent a lot on the underlying city real estate dynamics as well.
Right.
Obviously, the price of our offering also varies quite significantly between an Indore and a Bombay, right? Indore, you might get a bed for 10 to 12,000 per month. Bombay, that number can go up to 27 to 35,000 a month. So I think the underlying real estate price is a big driver, which the consumer also recognizes. But the other thing to keep in mind is also what is the alternative for that consumer. In Bombay, for example, finding for bachelors to find an apartment in good societies is difficult, and sadly that is a situation in Bombay. A lot of them don't allow bachelors.
Agreed.
So obviously they naturally gravitate towards the more organized players because then it's easier to find a place, right? Versus compared to outskirts of Pune or Indore, where there's abundant availability of 1 BHK, 2 BHK apartments. So, you have to price yourselves keeping that in mind as well. So, whenever we take on a building, it's not just the economics of that building or the price that we're looking at, we're also looking at what is the area around us and what is the alternative for that student. And he has to be able to see value in coming to your space versus renting something of his own and running all the services himself, right? There has to be clear value for him to pay that price differential. So there are certain markets which are more sensitive, the others where it's lower.
Perfect. And this may be a little, more forward-looking question, but just to give you a little context, we've seen a lot of securitization, right, of real estate with REITs and stuff like that. Any real estate that can generate stable cash flows getting converted into securities or products. And in places like the US, for example, like we actually have REITs of student housing in markets like the US. So do you see that as this market becomes more mature and standardized, do you think that there is potential for, maybe investors as well to make money off something like student housing?
Absolutely, and I think we've already started seeing that in the commercial space in India. So we've already started, a couple of commercial REITs. I think student housing will definitely be the next to follow. Very stable cash flow. I think what we are now moving towards is build to suit assets.
Right.
Because these are going to be larger assets. I think today where we are constrained by is the size of the assets available, right? You have 100, 150, 200 sort of assets. If you look at it globally, typically student housing assets are 500 plus beds. So I feel now with this space getting, acknowledged and sort of well defined, we're all moving towards the build to suit space where developers are building hostels specific to requirements of operators. And I think this is what will now drive, the REIT business in India, because then the asset pool will become substantial and meaningful for a real estate investor to start getting excited.
Right.
That makes sense. And speaking of investors getting excited, do you think you might be able to help us with which are the markets to watch out for when it comes to student housing in India?
So I mean, we're also amazed every time we go looking at cities, and we're amazed at how many colleges exist, in cities and such large colleges. But, where we're largely focused on is, your Delhi, Bombay's, your Bangalore. Pune is a massive student housing hub.
Right.
Dehradun has been a great surprise in terms of, the market of private colleges. And recently we've also discovered Mangalore. Very interesting marketplace, lots of private colleges, engineering colleges, medical colleges. There are a couple of colleges with more than 10,000 students each, right? So till we didn't visit those markets, we didn't even realize the depth of students in these markets, and they're almost built like student towns.
Right. So keeping with this forward-looking theme, your space has also raised funding recently. So firstly, I wanted to congratulate you on that.
Yeah.
And then secondly, ask you what your plans are for the future now. What is the expansion plan for your space going into the next few years?
So we are obviously focused on, quality student accommodation. Over COVID gave us a good opportunity to also reflect in, what the product is, how can we improve the product, and how we scale this product. I think the most important part about this business is execution. And we've actually taken time over the last 2 years to figure how we would scale this business. So I think with this capital, we, are looking to deliver almost 16,000 beds this academic year.
Wow.
And, the business is quite, busy. All teams are busy right now to make sure we're getting these beds operational as we're about to enter the new academic year. And the year after, we're looking at about 30,000 beds. So we are looking at entering Mangalore this year in terms of the new markets over and above the markets that we're already present in. So plan to 16,000 beds, 16,000 happy students, and just making sure we are able to deliver that.
Right. All right. I think with that, Shubha and Nidhi, we've come to the end of our conversation today. And since we were speaking about student housing, I have to thank you for an incredibly educational and insightful conversation about the market at large. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing where your space goes in the future.
No, thank you so much for inviting us and for giving us a platform to talk about your space. This is it's very close to our heart, as you can imagine. So we love talking about it and spreading the word. So thank you for having us here.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow Concrete Conversations on Instagram to know more about upcoming episodes and for some behind the scenes content.
For more deep dives into the world of Indian real estate, stay tuned for more Concrete Conversations.